Welcome back to Brussels. Once again, I'm Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels. It's been an extraordinary day here, an historic summit, by all accounts, an extremely successful one, and a terrific day of conversations at NATO 2030 at Brussels Forum. And we get to conclude the day, and we're really very delighted to have with us the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander de Croo. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us. Thanks for taking the time at the end of a very busy day.
Thank you for having me at the end of the day.
Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure. You know, not surprisingly, we just thought it would be very nice to take a few minutes and hear a bit your own reflections on the day and what you heard, what struck you, maybe what surprised you. Prime Minister, thanks.
Well, I think that this summit, the build-up to this summit was a positive one. We knew that the message coming from the United States was kind of diametrical as opposed to what we have been hearing over the last years. I think President Biden arriving yesterday on the tarmac of the airport, he was already quite open about basically saying America's back. And I think that got elaborated more in detail during the meeting today. I think that President Biden really set the tone at the start of this discussion by making very clear how important NATO is in the way the United States looks at the world. Made it very clear that US leadership was going to be more stable, more predictable, something that the rest of the world could build on. And I think if you look back at the last 4 years, I mean, a lot of things could be said about the last 4 years. But one of the issues is that in a chaotic world that is changing so fast, if you get too many surprises, and I think very often the United States surprised us, that is hard. And looking at the state of the world today, coming out of this COVID pandemic, economy rebounding, I think the last thing we would need now is even more instability, more unpredictability. I think that's one element. Second element was very clear. Article 5 really put center stage. Article 5 is basically says if any of the partners is being attacked, there's an obligation to support them. Made also very clear that only one country ever invoked Article 5, and that was the United States after 9/11. I think then the discussion afterwards is a rich discussion where countries put their priorities. Priorities on the relation to Russia, priorities on the relation to China, priorities on technological development, where I think the NATO countries really have to make up some backlog that we've had, and then I think maybe as important as everything I said, emphasize that NATO is about defense, but it's also about values. And for me, one of the more striking phrases that's been said is that someone said, well, the erosion of democracy, even within our own societies, is probably the biggest threat to which NATO is being confronted. And I agree with that.
There was a lot of discussion before the summit about the idea of a more political NATO. Mm-hmm. Of course, NATO was always a political institution, among other things. But one does, in fact, hear a lot about this. What struck you on that front? You know, a place where, you know, key issues of the day are going to be the subject of consultation among allies. What was on the agenda?
Well, if you look at the agenda that Secretary General Stoltenberg put forward, the number one element in his NATO 2030 strategy is consultation. And I think that is important. I think too often over the last years, NATO partners sometimes took decisions related to their security without consulting with other countries. That fragilizes a partnership. I mean, this is by far the most successful partnership ever built in history. But if you see that countries are starting to make their own moves without consulting, that fragilizes. And you see that, I mean, some other world powers over the last years have tried to divide NATO. Any effort that tries to divide NATO and that is successful, every time it's a little piece that deconstructs the whole structure. That Of course, and we are at an important moment. There is a NATO reflection going on, and rightfully so. I mean, we're not. The world has changed over the last 10 years. There is within the European Union also a reflection going on, related to our Eastern Partnership, related to our relation to Russia. I don't see one as a threat to the other. I really see it as an advantage. This is the right moment to do this analysis. The fact that this analysis is going on in parallel on both sides actually gives tremendous room for convergence, for a better division of labor and so on. But if you want NATO to be a partnership which is in equilibrium, then Europe needs to be clear. The European countries need to be clear about their own priorities.
What about China, Prime Minister? NATO seems to have gone from hardly any mention of China to a lot today. How do you read that?
Well, it's reflecting reality. China is a world power. It's a world power on the economic side. It's a world power on the traditional military side. It is a world power in cyberspace. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I think that the general tone was not a hostile tone. I mean, this was a tone where, okay, China is a factor in the world, and if I take the Belgian position, I mean, we are open for business and open for relations with China. But the key element for me is reciprocity. I'm okay if Chinese investments take place in our economy. And we have rules on critical infrastructure, of course, but all the rest, I'm open to that. But I want to be able to do the same in China. I want our companies to have their IP protected. I want to be protected against dumping practices and so on. And there I think there is a degree of self-confidence on the European side that has been growing over the past 4 years. I think the past 4 years have been difficult. But one of the things came out of that is that the European countries understood that we need to get out of the shadow of the United States. That does not mean that we are being divided. I think we need to do our own analysis on what our priorities are, what we think is important. If those priorities are convergent, which seems to be the case today, that's great. And no one, if we are aligned, no one can get around this. And we are a tremendous force in the world on free trade. We're a tremendous force in the world on respecting human rights, on democracy. I mean, there's so much we can do in the world. But if at some point in the future, who knows, we would not be aligned, Europe needs to be able to stand on its own legs. And I think in the end, that's a good thing for the transatlantic relationship.
Prime Minister, thank you. It seems to me that also points very naturally in the direction of, well, the question of NATO-EU cooperation. And it seems that things are moving on that front as well.
Yeah.
What came out of the summit today around that?
I think that what came out of that is that one is strengthening the other. And if you want NATO to function well, then the European Union needs to be able to be very clear on its foreign policy priorities. And we see that the economy is becoming way more geopolitical than it used to be. And we see that in the pharmaceutical sector, and we see it as Belgians. I mean, we are a vaccine powerhouse. If you look at the COVID vaccines in the world, somewhere around 15% of the worldwide production is coming out of Belgium. Why do we have that? Well, that's because, if I can say so, we're good. I mean, we have talent, we have an interesting environment, we are stable, we're logistically well connected. We see that is changing. We see that more and more countries are looking at pharmaceuticals from a geopolitical perspective. That's going to happen with microprocessors. We know that is going on. That's probably going to happen in a lot of domains. Now, we can do a lot of thinking. Is that a good thing or it's a bad thing? This, I think, is the lens that the world is going to look at the economy. And that means that we Europeans need to have that perspective as well. And we can set the tone. I mean, as a trading bloc in the world, we are by far the #1 trading bloc in the world. Well, maybe we need to start behaving as the #1 trading bloc in the world. Up to now, we haven't really done that. And you feel that on the European level, there is a growing of consciousness on that.
You know, the session before this one was focused very much actually on those issues related to defense industries in particular. It was all about innovation. And I'm wondering if maybe to say a few words about that, because NATO also took some decisions today to set up a new accelerator for innovation and some other things, very much in the vein that you were just talking about around vaccine development and other things in Belgium.
Well, we see that technology matters, and technology matters in our health. It also matters in defense. And if you see at what is happening around the world, in general, the NATO countries have some catching up to do. And so that NATO plays a role in that and wants to accelerate technological development is a good thing. That has always been the case. If you look at defense, there is always a technological component to defense. And actually, it is already reflected. If you look at the NATO statistics, you see that over the last years, the spending has gone up, which was one of the wishes of the pledge in Wales. But we also see that the investment in infrastructure has gone up dramatically. Technology is everywhere, and it's definitely here in this domain. Maybe touch just a few seconds on cyber, where I think, I mean, if you today want to explain to the general population what's the benefit of being in NATO, I'm convinced that in the next years, cyber is going to be one of the elements. I mean, cyber security is a defense that we do. We do that on a daily basis. We get attacked on a daily basis, and it is the type of attacks, the type of destabilization that could hurt our citizens in a very direct way. So that domain, working together in that domain, mutual agreements in defense, sharing information in cybersecurity defense is a key one.
Now, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to meet with President Biden tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And what are you eager to hear? I mean, you told us a bit about the atmosphere in your earlier remarks, but what in particular would you be keen to hear from the president when you meet with him tomorrow?
Well, we have a bilateral program tomorrow between the United States and Belgium. I think what I would like to talk about is, for example, about vaccine production. One of the things which I think was frankly a mistake is that the Biden administration invoked the Defense Act related to vaccine production. And at first sight, I could understand that everyone wanted to produce vaccines. But if you look in detail, I mean, vaccine production is such a global thing. I mean, these are global value chains, hundreds of different ingredients coming from all parts of the world. And that policy really hampered vaccine production worldwide. And we have seen it. If we see the production we have in Belgium, we account for 70% of the exports of vaccines in Europe. So we do a lot of exports. And we've seen that our production was slowed down because of the America First attitude. And I really hope that we learn out of this and that we understand that if I mean, this was about production, this is about being it as seamless as possible. If you then get roadblocks in global trade, that's not a good thing, and it's to the detriment of everyone. If now the G7 pledged 1 billion vaccines for the rest of the world, we wholly support this. I think this is necessary. I think the current pace of production towards the rest of the world, I think it's a disgrace that some countries would only be vaccinated in 2023. So it's great that that pledge has been made. But if you want to realize that pledge, then we should stop all roadblocks on the trade, the value chain towards vaccine production.
Prime Minister, thank you. I'm conscious of our time. Perhaps allow me a final question. The NATO summit launched a process that's aimed at revising the strategic concept over the next year. I mean, do you think that that's going to be an incremental result in the end, or are you looking for something more profound, more revolutionary out of that?
No, I think that this strategic exercise is really it's a turning point, and it reflects a world that really has has changed, and I think it proves that history is not a straight line. I mean, sometimes it makes some curves, and you sometimes go backwards, and this is what we see that is happening. So we have high expectations on the exercise that is being done in the next years. We'll all be involved in this, and then who knows where we are in 1 year. I mean, what we have been confronted with the last year, no one predicted this. One last element, if you let me say that, I would like to thank the German Marshall Fund for organizing this together with NATO. I think it's important to really bring these summits, like the NATO summit today, to bring it to the outside world and to show the discussion that is going on and to enable people to participate in the discussion. So big fan of what you have been organizing today and in the days that come.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for those very kind words, and also for your reflections on the day. That's also a cue for me maybe to offer some thanks of our own, if you'll allow me. Okay. First of all, to the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for partnering with us, not just on this event, but also on Brussels Forum as a whole. Mm-hmm. We're really very, very grateful for that. And as we close the day, let me also say a few words of thanks, if you'll allow me. First of all, to NATO as a strategic partner, and in particular to our friends at the NATO Public Diplomacy Division, to the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy, Baiba Braza, to Carmen Romero, to Nicola DeSantis, to the whole public diplomacy team. We're really immensely grateful for your partnership, but also for your friendship and your help. And also to Benedetta Berti, NATO's head of policy planning, for her contributions. It was a pleasure from start to finish, and we're really very, very grateful for that. But we're also not quite finished with Brussels Forum yet. It goes on for the rest of the week, and I hope you'll join us for those conversations. Also, if you're watching us, please look out for a survey that you'll receive where you can give us some feedback on this event. We'd be very grateful for that. Please do join us tomorrow, and also you'll be able to join us, in fact, for a special, very informal event this evening, which is Brussels Forum After Hours on Clubhouse. Thank you all again from Brussels.